Hello everyone, I'm JG and welcome back to Music Forever, where today I'm going to be reviewing the newest album from Eminem, Kamikaze. Now this is the new album that he surprise dropped this past Friday, and of course when I woke up to the news that Eminem had dropped a surprise album, I was of course kind of concerned, considering, like many people, I did not like Revival. I did not like Revival one bit. If you want to hear my full thoughts on that album, my link to the review for it is in the description down below, but yeah, it was not a project I enjoyed at all. It ranked pretty highly on my worst albums of last year, and it was just, for many reasons that have been beaten to death already, so I'm not going to bother going over them really again. It was just a not fun experience overall. My least favorite Eminem album, easily, just not fun in the slightest. So I was kind of concerned that this album was going to be much more of the same, and I was kind of concerned given how, soon it's been since Revival dropped that we're getting this new album. Revival came out last December. It hasn't even been a year yet, and we got this new album here in August, or now it's September when this video is uploading, but it came out in August technically. And while this album is related to Revival, of course it exists kind of as a result of the backlash thrown at Revival. It's kind of its own thing too. It's not like a Revival Part 2 or anything like that. But it's definitely related, I would say. It fixes a lot of the problems I had with Revival, but at the same time has many flaws of its own. And overall, I would say I don't care for this project overall. I'm not really liking it. I think it's better than Revival easily, but kind of like in the same way that the common cold is better than the flu. It's just not enjoyable, but it's not awful either. I'm going to start with getting some of my positive things to say about this album out of the way first. I will say that this album, in terms of its production, is much better than it was on Revival. Not that any of the production on this album blew me away or anything like that. It wasn't like I was in love with any of the beats here on this album, but they were all definitely better than the ones on Revival, where you had, corny rap rock kind of mixtures and just bad production, really corny sampling. This project tends to avoid that for the most part, which I will say is a good thing overall, even if I'm not in love with the production here either. Also, I like the fact that this project is a lot more to the point than Revival. That album was like over an hour and just way too freaking long. This one is only like 45 minutes, much more to the point, and easier to digest overall. I didn't feel like Revival needed to be as long as it was, and this project is a good length overall, I would say. And also, Eminem's technical ability on this project is also still very high, of course. He still is clearly one of the most talented out there when it comes to actual, rapping. However, despite all these positive things, these few positive things really, this album does have a lot of flaws that really drag it down. And unfortunately, the biggest of those flaws, I feel, is the lack of substance on this album. And by substance, I mean, deeper meaning, deeper storytelling, or really any reason to care about the lyrics or the message or anything like that here on this project. While there's, a lot of words and syllables and wordplay and all that packed into the verses of these songs, there's very little actual substance to them. You can go through a lot of these verses and just, go through every line and word and just find very little of what Eminem is actually saying here. Much of the tracks kind of boil down to either Eminem bragging or Eminem just kind of going at people that, didn't like Revival pretty much. And he just kind of goes off on all these different, tangents with wordplay and things like that make these verses feel a lot more packed with content than they actually are, I feel. And of course, I will commend him, like I did before, with, his wordplay ability, with his technical ability, his flow, all that. But it's not super interesting to listen to when there's no actual substance being said. And the fact that he's just rapping fast isn't super interesting, guys. Like, at this point, it's not interesting anymore. It was maybe interesting when he first did it, but now it's years later. There's other rappers that could rap fast too. It's not all that impressive anymore. There are some moments on this project where Eminem breaks away from talking about, the responding to the criticism and just bragging and all that. For example, on tracks like Normal and the nice guy, good guy combo that comes later on in the album, he's talking about, relationships, being bad at relationships, all that kind of stuff. And the problem is here, at least, that, I've heard Eminem talk about this a whole ton before in the past. It's not super interesting now. It wasn't super interesting on Revival either. It's just not interesting at this point in his career anymore. He's kind of recycling the same ideas again, and it's not super exciting here. I will say that there is one track where I feel like the lyrics are actually pretty good overall. And that's the track Stepping Stone, where he's, actually telling a story that's actually interesting and that I actually care about. And, it has to do with D12 kind of falling apart, the whole, why that happened, how it affected him, all of that stuff. And it's just interesting to hear. I like it. It's, given that I'm an Eminem fan, I know D12, I'm invested in that, I care about it, and I liked overall what he was doing with the storytelling on this track. I wish more of the tracks on this album, and, on Revival 2 by extension, were kind of like this track, where he's just telling, personal stories again, that, have, he could still have, the high technicality when it comes to his rapping ability, but he could also throw in some actual deeper meaning into the lyrics, I feel. And that's what I really want from him at this point in his career. And on this album, while he still has that very high technical skill, he's not really giving me much, deeper meaning to care about in these songs. Outside of these few occasions where he's talking about different things, like I said before, for the most part, he's kind of a mixture of bragging and kind of going at people who hated on Revival, which is kind of an odd thing in some regards, that I'm really not sure what this album is supposed to be, because there's times on here where Eminem, he's rapping about how he's the greatest and all that, like on the track Greatest, and, he's constantly, going after all these newer rappers, the Little Pumps and the Little Yachty's and all of them, constantly going after them and all that, kind of, trying to put them in their place, if you will. But at the same time, this album kind of exists as a, in response to the backlash that Revival got for being a pretty crappy album, honestly. And he, is Eminem playing defense on this album? Is he, playing offense, really? He's bragging about how he's the greatest, but at the same time, he just released an awful album not any more than like a year ago. And, of course, there are people who like Revival, there are people out there who think it's not awful and all that, but the general consensus was that it was pretty terrible. And, of course, it's just kind of odd to have him, come onto his tracks and be like, yeah, I'm the best and all that, when he just dropped a terrible project a few months ago. It doesn't really make much sense to me. And, to make matters even weirder, there are times on this album where, he does go after some rappers that, I don't care for personally, like the beforehand mentioned Lil Pump and Yachty and all that. But there are also times where he does go after some odder choices, I guess you could say. He does praise some artists like Kendrick and J. Cole and, the other, like, 5 rappers that any modern hip-hop fan knows and kind of accepts as being, lyrical. But there's, moments where he goes after, like, Earl Sweatshirt on this thing, which was kind of odd. And also the kind of controversial part where he goes after Tyler, the Creator, on the track Fall, which there's definitely a lot you could talk about here with this track. The controversy on this track has to do with the fact that Eminem kind of, in a sense, refers to Tyler, the Creator, as a certain homophobic slur. That, if you're unfamiliar with Tyler, the Creator, on his most recent studio album, Flower Boy, that came out a little over a year ago, he kind of has some lyrics on that album that seem to suggest that either he's homosexual or bisexual or something along those lines. And so, of course, these lines in this song here have caused some controversy. And, of course, I understand that Eminem has, done stuff like this before. In the past, he's used this particular slur before. He's used it aimed at people before. But here, I find it a little odd because Tyler, the Creator, is an artist, especially when it comes to his most recent album, Flower Boy, that, most people like that album. Most people see him as one of the more interesting figures in modern hip-hop, along with artists like Kendrick, that Eminem is praising at points on this album. So I'm not sure what his beef is with Tyler. I mean, I did believe Tyler did, like, criticize Revival in a tweet or something along those lines, but still, it's kind of a weird angle to come at Tyler at, considering that he actually might be gay or bi or something. It's a weird angle, and I'm not really sure what Eminem was thinking with this one. I know his whole shtick is pretty much being controversial, but on this album, he's trying to regain the trust of his fan base. He's trying to show that, hey, I can still make good music. The last thing he probably wants to do is upset some more people, considering Revival did that enough. I mean, I doubt at the end of the day that a lot of Eminem fans are really going to care all that much, and I really don't know if Tyler, the Creator himself is really going to care, but I just find it kind of funny how, Tyler, the Creator, also another artist who started off relatively edgy, also kind of controversial for using the same slur in question in his earlier works, how he's kind of developed into a much more mature, artist in like the span of a couple years than what Eminem has done in like a few decades. It's kind of strange to think about, and really, I don't really feel like Tyler really needs to respond to this if he wanted, if he plans to. I really don't feel like he needs to, because the quality of Flower Boy alone, it just kind of proves that, given the quality of this album Revival, it's not worth the time, honestly. While Eminem might be have more technical skill than Tyler, Tyler is definitely a better artist all around. Definitely has a better vision when it comes to creating his albums, which Eminem just clearly lacks here on this album, because really the only vision here is to just kind of go at haters, and that's not really interesting for a whole album's runtime. I'm sorry, I really don't care all that much about that. Also, could we just mention how Eminem, he kind of brags about this on this track about inspiring lots of modern rappers, including Hopsin. Like, who out there willingly would brag about inspiring Hopsin? I mean, I bet Hopsin's pretty happy about this. I mean, at least someone out there is happy about this track, but it's just really odd. I'm just not sure what to think about it overall. It just leaves me speechless in some regards. And when it comes to the tracks on here where Eminem's really going after the haters and all that, the people who didn't like Revival, well, it kind of falls apart with the fact that this album isn't all that great, in my opinion. Like I said, there's a lot of technical skill on display here, but Eminem has very little substance to back it up, so I really don't care for the project all that much. And once again, Eminem keeps talking about how he's the greatest, how he's the best, how all these other rappers suck compared to him. But this project, as well as his last, have done very little to prove to me that Eminem shouldn't be right alongside them. In terms of recent output, of course, I feel like Eminem has great material in his past discography that maybe some of these artists he's talking about don't necessarily have at all. But in terms of modern day output, Eminem isn't that far behind some of these people he's criticizing, honestly. And I just don't really care to hear him complain for track after track about this. It becomes particularly cringy during the couple skits that appear on this project. The first one involves Paul calling Eminem and telling him not to do the album because it's a bad idea and all that. It's a fine skit, I guess. But it's really the second skit where Em's calling Paul that things get really so bad that it's funny, honestly. Because Eminem, he's talking at first and he's like, he's all like, I saw someone's review or the criticism about Revival, and I'm all angry about it. And he kind of comes off a lot like, those fan accounts for, like, bands or artists who comment whenever you leave, like, a negative video, a review or something like that, or maybe leave a negative comment on, like, their channel or something like that. And you're just like, maybe you're just like, I don't care for this artist that much. And they respond, they got, like, the band logo in their profile picture. Their username is like a mixture of like band, the words relating to the band or something like that, like their album names or something like that, and they just respond to you with like a research paper's worth of hate. And that's kind of like what Eminem does here on this track, except that he's not an Eminem fan, he's actually Eminem himself. And he's just going off, and he's getting real riled up about someone just not liking Revival, criticizing Revival, not having Revival going over their heads and all that. And he's just super mad, and he's like, I think I know where they live, and I'm gonna go find them. And I guess the implication is that he's gonna like kill them or something, because all that Slim Shady stuff. Obviously, he's not being serious. It's a skit. It's not a real phone call. But it just comes across as so cringy, in my opinion. Like, did I really want like a 40-something second long rant from Eminem on this project where he basically throws a hissy fit? Not really, and it doesn't really make me sympathetic towards him either. It just makes me cringe and get really tired and just laugh too, just because I can't believe this is the timeline we're living on. I can't believe this is the timeline that I exist in, that I'm reviewing this album where Eminem has a skit where he's pretty much flipping out because someone didn't like his last album and he's gonna go kill him. It's so absurd, but like not in a good way either. Not in a way where he's trying to piss people off or something like that. It's absurd in a way where it just comes across as sad. The features on this album are a pretty mixed bag, honestly. The Joyner Lucas feature, while I'm not really a big fan of him as an artist overall, it was pretty solid in my opinion. The Royce feature was also pretty decent in my opinion, though I much prefer the collaboration that these two did on Royce's album, The Book of Ryan, on the track Caterpillar. I thought that was just a better track than this one overall by a long shot. Mostly just because I didn't really care for Eminem on this collaborative track. He kind of has this very choppy, sounding flow, which is kind of odd considering he makes fun of rappers for having this type of flow at other points on the album. So I'm not really sure what was going on there, but yeah, it was a decent feature, I guess, from Royce. I just wish he was on a better track overall. And then on the end of this thing, on the nice guy, good guy combo pack that we get at the end here, it has this feature from an artist. Let me see here. Her name was Jessie Reyes. Not really sure who she is. Not really familiar with any of her music. But I absolutely hated her features on this album. It starts off with her singing in like this sort of baby voice that's kind of really high-pitched and screechy and annoying and grating and makes me want to wish I was deaf because it just sounds that bad. This is one of the few moments on the album where it actually sounds painful to listen to just because it's just such a pain on the ears how she sounds here. And she kind of keeps up this sort of baby voice as she goes into the rapping, which is better than the singing, but still did not care for it all that much. And like I said, combine this with the lyrical subject matter being just recycled stuff that we've seen from Eminem before pretty much, just makes for a couple of really bad tracks overall. Probably two of my least favorite in the entire track listing. So overall, I did not care for this project all that much. I think it's better than Revival. It definitely improves on some of the problems that album had, but it still has problems of its own. The lack of substance, the pretty badly sung hooks for the most part from Eminem, repeating ideas at times, and some pretty, hit or miss features. It just leads to a really unenjoyable listening experience in my opinion. If, the only thing you like in your rappers is technical ability, you like the fact that they can rap fast, and they just talk about how they're the greatest and all that, then this album is for you. You're going to like this project. I'm certain a good amount of Eminem fans out there probably fit into that category, and you'll like that project. Or if you like, the Hobsons, those types of rappers, I think you'll like this album. But if you want more depth into the lyrics, you want something that actually has substance that's worth returning to, that kind of sticks in your mind, gives you something to think about, this album isn't going to have it for you. Because much of this project is just Eminem going after his haters. Lots of times just, getting angry, talking about how he's the best, recycling ideas he's talked about before. And then there's Stepping Stones, which is a decent track. I do recommend you check that track out. Even though I'm not a big fan of the hook on that track, the chorus on there, the lyrics on it are pretty decent, and it's worth checking out on its own. But the rest of this album, unless you're a diehard Eminem fan or you just really want to see what awaits, I wouldn't bother with this one because it's not much better than Revival, honestly. It definitely shows that Eminem is listening to some extent, which is kind of odd considering if he hates the fact that people hate Revival. Why is he kind of taking their advice in some regards on this next album? It's a little strange. It doesn't make much sense when you think about it, but I'm not really going to complain about it because it resulted in a better album. Even if it's not a good album, it's still a better album. So I'll give it that. It's a better album, but I don't care for it all that much. I'm not going to be returning to this thing, and it's definitely in my some of my least favorite Eminem albums, along with Revival and Encore. But yeah. That's just my own personal opinion. If you happen to disagree, if you happen to have an opinion of your own, if you happen to hate this thing even more than Revival, if you happen to love this thing for whatever reason, perfectly okay. In fact, feel free to leave that in the comment section down below. And while you're down there, make sure to leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel for more music-related content. Things like album reviews, countdown list, discussion videos, track reviews, all that stuff. If you enjoy that stuff, make sure you subscribe. And with that said, thank you guys for watching, and stay golden.